We are very pleased to have personalities from the media, legal, and arts fields here with us to discuss what the joy of talk means to them. Together with Mr. Chia, we will have Ms. Amanda Chong and Ms. Kamini Ramachandran on our panel. Ms. Amanda Chong is a Deputy Senior State Counsel at the Attorney General's Chambers. She's also a poet and co-founder of Readable, a non-profit organization that runs literacy classes for migrant women and children from disadvantaged families. Last but not least, we have Ms. Kamini Ramachandran, who is the director of Moonshadow Stories. Ms. Kamini is a pioneer in the field of storytelling in Asia and has contributed extensively to the global storytelling scene. She started the Young Storytellers Mentorship Program to sustain the art of storytelling by nurturing emerging talents in Singapore. A warm welcome to our distinguished panelists. Also joining us today is our Principal Master Teacher of English Language, Mr. Cedric Leong. He leads the professional learning of English language teacher leaders and teachers. He will be moderating today's panel discussion. Now, I'll hand the time over to Cedric for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Michelle. And Stephen, good to join us.
Thank you.
Our distinguished panel, our teacher colleagues, wherever you are out there, this is a distinct privilege to be able to come face-to-face, meet face-to-face, but glad you're joining us from wherever you are. Good afternoon and welcome to the discussion panel. In line with the theme of this conference, the joy of talk, this panel will discuss the nature of talk that is important to learning. In his keynote address, Stephen has pointed to the value of talk in social interaction. And talk can keep a couple in blissful union. It can also tear them apart. It can help build bonds with others, help us build bonds with others and forge a sense of that common humanity, a sense of shared identity and destiny. But how is talk in a classroom different from talk in social interaction? Does classroom talk, and I think Stephen mentions that there is joy as a result of talk. But can classroom talk really have the same or similar joyful and meaningful experiences for our students? In 2008, Douglas Barnes describes class exploratory talk as an opportunity for speakers to sort out their ideas and thoughts, to find out what others think, and to seek to understand and interpret the perspectives of others in order to create new ways of thinking, new ways of looking at the world. To Barnes, exploratory talk is part and parcel of active learning in the classroom. Stephen has made the point that exploratory talk must come from an inherent curiosity to ask questions, to provoke thought, and to challenge the norm. This afternoon, I invite you to use this panel discussion as an opportunity to engage in exploratory talk with us. What better way is there for teachers in a fraternity to learn than by seeking out what our ideas mean and sound like to people who are not in our fraternity? So our panelists come with experiences from different backgrounds, both in and outside the field of education. I'm sure they bring with them fresh perspectives and insights on the role of exploratory talk in the real world. Perspectives and insights that would have implications for the way we practice in our classrooms as teachers. So colleagues, do join us in our conversation and send your questions and thoughts and ideas to the panelists over the next 40 minutes or so. We will begin with a quick round for each of our panelists to offer their thoughts and ideas on the theme and perhaps to also respond briefly to what Stephen has offered us just now in his keynote. So panelists, do take no more than 2 minutes in this round, and we'll start with Kamini. Kamini, please.
Thank you, Cedric. Thank you, Stephen, for that keynote.
I think the biggest takeaway for me listening to your keynote was how much fun he was having talking to us. And there was so much joy in the way he spoke. And this whole thing is called the joy of talk, right? So what came across was that confidence and that personal anecdotes and how you humanize this whole concept of talking. And he had real connections with all of us as human beings because he brought his family in, he brought his workplace in, and the words that you chose to use were accessible to everyone. But what was memorable for me as a storyteller is there was a narrative, there was a story in what he was trying to say. And it reached out to almost everyone out there and made it easy for us to remember, recall, and to retell it again to somebody else. So what looks so easily packaged comes with years and years of experience and also familiarity with language and to get to that level of fluency. So what struck me as a parent and also as a teaching artist was how he talked about building confidence in the classroom and how it has to allow for mistakes to be made so that children and students and learners can gain that confidence over time. This also means that we as educators or as leaders or as parents need to also show that side of us where we are also flawed, where sometimes we stumble, we use the wrong word, and it's all right because with practice you get better. So these are some of the key takeaways that I got listening to Stephen just now.
Thank you, Kamini. I think I really understand what it means when it comes to having confidence in the joy of talk, or confidence in talk in the classroom. And I think sometimes you look at the product and not so much at the process. And this idea of becoming confident and the process of sorting out your thoughts and ideas rather than actually making that presentation in the end. It's the process towards it. Thank you so much for that. And Amanda?
So I really enjoyed Steve's walk down memory lane, taking us back into like the various classrooms that he was part of, and what he said about how a classroom should be a safe space for conversation. Because when he said all of that, it made me think of my own experience in a classroom growing up in Singapore and how I kind of evolved in that relationship with talk in a classroom. And there were certain moments where I had more confidence and then less confidence again. And I remember starting out primary school being really nervous about speaking up in class. And I think that was, I grew up in the 90s, and I think that was the culture of the classroom then. And it was only really later in primary school through the guidance of teachers, and really teachers very intentionally creating an environment where they say that what we say is important, what we say advances the conversation, there is no right answer. That kind of grew my confidence in speaking up in class. And by the time I was in secondary school, I actually had the nickname Motor Mouth Mandy because I would not keep quiet about anything, right? And then at the same time, when I eventually went to university and I went to Harvard Law, and the entire classroom was actually based on Socratic questioning, right? So you use exploratory talk as like a pedagogical device. But then my tongue was tied again. I was so nervous and self-conscious about speaking. I would actually script out my entire intervention before I would say something in class. And no one was expecting me to get the answer right, but I put all this pressure on myself. I didn't want to repeat what someone had said. And again, my relationship with talk became a bit more strained. And it was really a male classmate who came up to me and said, Amanda, why do you always apologize before you say something in class or before you ask a question? Your questions are valid and you say very intelligent things. You shouldn't apologize for taking up that space. And that was when my relationship with talk changed again. And I kind of had to move away from that culture of apologizing that I was asking questions and just own it and make that natural kind of intervention and conversation as I would in a regular conversation. So I feel that my own relationship with exploratory talk evolved with the context that I was in. But I think what Stephen said about creating a safe space, I do think that is the key principle here for all teachers who are creating spaces in their classrooms. And I definitely try to do that when I run Readable, which is the nonprofit. We have a class for the teens that I teach. And I think my best review of the class was when one of the kids said that there is no right answer in this classroom, and they feel that they're confident to share their ideas. And I think that's when I know that, as someone who's trying to teach, we are doing something right in creating that safe space.
Thank you, Amanda. I can really identify with the, I remember when I was a student, even at university, when it's my turn to talk, my heart will be thumping. And by the time I get down to actually getting the first word out, somebody else has started, has moved on, and the conversation has moved on. So that was something I could really identify with. Stephen, any further thoughts to?
Oh, I thought Stephen gave a great talk. No, but thank you for your comments. I mean, it is my own personal journey. I had a colorful education. I will tell everyone that basically, after primary school, I didn't do well in my PSLE. I went to the normal stream in Sec 1. Fortunately, a teacher took me under her wing, and Sec 2, I got back to Express. I sneaked through my O-levels, I got into JC miraculously, but I repeated my first year in junior college, so I spent 3 years in JC. So that's why I tell people I have more friends online, because of all the years I spent in school. But honestly, I mean, the talk itself, the way I speak now, I was not doing this in school. And obviously, it's over years of practice and experience as well. And like you, Cedric, I had some palpitations before I started speaking, because no matter how many times I've done this, there are still some nerves. Yeah. But the whole idea is that I think while you're doing this on stage, it may be different. In the classroom, it should be a space where they do not have to fear as much. There shouldn't be those palpitations. It should be a conversation where I can just, as you're at home talking to your friend, you can say, but why did we do that? Or why not that? And I think that's really what I'm hoping can happen in our education system. We're very good at what is in the books. We're not so good at what's going off book, and to figure out how those answers came to be, and perhaps questioning if those answers should be the answers. So I'm hoping the talk and more talk will allow us to expand our horizons in that area.
Thank you, Stephen, for that. In fact, I thought instead of asking you to move into the second round of discussion, why not let's take the questions from the audience. Sure. And we have the first question from Jujin. Jujin was a former colleague of mine, still a very good friend, and he's in the Curriculum Planning and Development Division. Jujin's question: is, many learners experience anxiety when they talk. What strategies do you use to manage your anxiety? How did you learn or develop them? And how can kids learn to do the same? Perhaps I'll ask Kamini to begin for us.
I think from a performing artist's perspective, and as you said, we're always on stage, this is something that I've taught my young mentees that I work with, and any workshop that I conduct. The breath, the ability to center yourself and control your entire mind and body just by breathing is something that educators tend to overlook. And they don't understand that breath work is so important as part of preparation in the classroom. Just simple deep breathing. Now for other children or students, if it helps to have both their hands kept together in a position that does not make them wonder, what do I do with my hands? Because that in itself can create a lot of anxiety. What do I do with my hands? So either putting them together on your lap, holding them, or having something to hold like a prop while you speak. And then of course the third, make sure you're hydrated and you are eating something before you speak. So, as presenters and performers, we forget to eat and drink, and we rush out there assuming that the body can magically sustain this, this adrenaline and anxiety. So something that I always ask my performers and students to keep in their bag is a banana, because the potassium is extremely calming, and the starch and sugar, of course, will nourish you temporarily. So breathe, keep something in your hand or hold your hands together, and make sure you eat and drink well.
I mean, I gotta agree, when I'm hungry, it's very hard to focus, But I will go beyond that. I think those are very practical steps to help you calm down, but first and foremost, you need to be prepared. I mean, I wrote this script quite some time ago, and over time I've read it many times. I've read it to myself many times. I've read it out loud several times on my own as well. I feel most nervous when I go in front of a TV screen and I'm unprepared for an interview. But when you're prepared, that's half the battle one. Having some nerves is fine. I mean, it kind of gets your adrenaline going and it helps with that as well. But once you are comfortable and you are certain that you know what it is you're going to talk about and the content that you have there, then you shouldn't be afraid. The rest is just once you start, it will kind of go.
And that's, of course, part of presentational talk.
Yeah.
I like the idea also about having banana. I'll just get a mixed banana. Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, those are great suggestions. Now I'm like, folding my hands in front of me, listening to like Kamini's tip, putting that into action. But I really do think, so you were addressing presentational talk, but for me, I guess I'll take it from the angle of impromptu talk, because that's what I have to do when I stand up in court as a lawyer. And I think what really has helped me is even if I have, like 30 seconds to react or less than 30 seconds, is to quickly get out like the 3 points that I want to say and maybe even just write them down like in one word points so that I already have that structure available to me in my head as I'm talking through. And the other thing that I became more aware of is that we actually can afford to slow down a lot when we speak and sometimes be very deliberate about slowing down. And that gives you a lot of time to think. And I only really appreciated this when I was in court because sometimes we're so afraid of silences and just staring into space. But the thing is that people don't actually feel it. And sometimes it takes them time as well to process what you're saying. And therefore pacing is beneficial both to the speaker as well as the listener.
Okay. Shall we have a minute of silence now?
Pregnant pause, as we call it.
All right. Another colleague of mine, Joy, has sent in a question. Joy from ELIS asks, Stephen, and this is a question to Stephen, seems like you enjoyed talking as a student. How much was it due to encouragement from your teachers and a safe classroom compared to factors outside of school? Pregnant pause.
Well, the funny thing is, if you ever speak to my parents, she'll tell me that my mom always constantly reminds me that up till I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old, I was really the strong, silent type. I hardly spoke at all. They brought me to a specialist to see if there was something wrong with my vocal cords, perhaps, or something. Actually, in class, I mean, I didn't really speak up that much. I was like a regular student. It's just after a while, I got to doing presentations and I found that I enjoyed that. And yes, there were certain teachers who helped nurture that, who gave me opportunities, who said, try this, go and help narrate the school video, for example. So it was little things like that along the way. But I never knew I would end up in this profession. I had no plan to do it. And I didn't, the talking kind of came along the way. But I guess you could say that in the older days when I was a kid, the classrooms were not really environments where you had interaction, the conversations. It was the old school, like, this is it, study this, There was not so much about what do you think of A, what do you think of B. It was only when I was older and in university that I encountered those interactions. And I found that worked for me, and later on in life, that was much of what I adopted. But unfortunately, it was university and it wasn't a local university. I had to leave the country because, well, in a way, ironically, because I couldn't get into a local university here, I left the country. But that opened my horizons to a different way of interacting.
Shall we take another question? Let's see. Cheryl from FHPS, I can't be sure which primary school that is. Let me call it up. Cheryl asks, do you see value in using philosophy in language learning and foster the joy of talk? Philosophy in language learning.
Ask Amanda. She's the poet.
I'm not quite sure what the conversation is referring to directly, but do we mean using philosophy, as in terms of that topic to get children to talk? And I guess to this I will say that during circuit breaker, one of the kids in Readable, he is an 8-year-old boy, very advanced, although he's from a family that doesn't speak English. We taught him since he was 4. and he is extremely competent in English. And he was really bored at home, and I was on a call with him, and he actually told me, Teacher Amanda, I'm really bored. I just read this Jules Verne book, 8-year-old. It was an abridged version, granted, but he said that one of the characters was a philosopher, and I really want to learn philosophy. Do you think you can arrange philosophy classes for me during circuit breaker? So thankfully, I do have friends who are like legitimate philosophers. And we actually started co-teaching a philosophy class with an 8-year-old. And it was just amazing, the richness of the conversations that we had, and how intuitively philosophical this 8-year-old was. And I mean, the entire thing was just directed purely by exploratory talk. It was conversational. And we were talking about ethics, metaphysics. We even talked about Plato and Aristotle. So I just felt that like, it wasn't even the substance of what we were discussing. It was the kinds of questions that he was throwing up, you know, and he was asking like, who was I before I existed? You know, which is a really profound question for an 8-year-old. And I feel that, I mean, we still continue to teach that class with him. And it was, I suppose, that one-on-one interaction with an adult, right, which children do not necessarily have. And I think it really impressed upon me that sometimes you just need to validate the questions that kids are already asking, and that gives them the space to explore more and be willing to even engage with topics that we might just deem too intellectual for them, but we're just not giving them a chance. And it also took me back to my own experiences in the classroom, where I really found what encouraged me to speak up more was when something that I said you know, received positive feedback from the teacher, like it made the teacher think differently about something, even if I was just standing up for something that I believed in, or it could be fairly trivial about like me disagreeing with a school rule, right? But if the teacher actually listened to it and said, and kind of took it on board, it made me feel like what I say can shift conversations, and I think that is what encourages us to share more.
And just to add to that, maybe, I think we don't need to know the answers. As teachers, we don't need to have all the answers. But I think very often we're afraid of questions because we might not have the answers to it, you know. Whereas I think in this day and age, if you tell the student that you don't know, but you later on go figure out the answer and bring it back to them, that is just as valuable. So I think we should not shy away from areas that we may not be confident, like philosophy. I mean, I have no idea, but sure, you take the questions and then you Google it, you know, to a certain extent. So I think that is an important tool as well.
Yeah, and often I think it's even more valuable for students themselves to go and do the research and come back with their answers or various responses from different people. Kamini, you might have something to say, right, about, say, philosophy for education or for children or something?
Yeah, so again, from the question, I'm not sure what the teacher meant by philosophy, but broader sense of anything to do with philosophy is about contemplation, asking questions and looking at the universe around you or the situation that you're in, and being curious and brave enough to question and to contemplate. So this also goes back to, you know, in storytelling, you must also not just have the ability to talk and speak, but the ability to listen. And it's this symbiotic relationship that there is always a teller and a listener. So what are we telling the universe, and what are we listening that the universe is giving back to us? So if as an educator you want to use philosophy in the classroom, you have Buddhist philosophy, you have Taoist, you have Hindu philosophy, you have the Western philosophers. So perhaps start with a paragraph or with a quotation or with a way of contemplation, and, you know, have like little story games and cards and visual ways of reimagining narratives in the classroom. So this develops vocabulary, helps the child acquire new words because they're listening to different words being thrown out by others. It's played like a game. And then you can build upon this, you know, over the weeks, where ultimately each child gets to present or tell their own story or to come up with their own philosophical quotations.
You brought up a very important aspect of this communication interaction. There's the listening part of the interaction rather than just the speaking part. In fact, we do have one question from Ivan, I think, from West Spring Primary, who says, hi, most students enjoy presenting. However, I think students should also learn how to listen and provide feedback. How can we promote the joy of talk with the joy of listening?
I think listening is a very important aspect of, especially when I interview people. I mean, I may have my list of questions there, but it is a conversation, so therefore you must respond to what they are saying and not just, I don't want to just run through my list of questions. And I think that's important in the classroom too, where teachers are listening to the students and not trying to cover the curriculum that they have set. Because today my agenda is to cover ABC, so I must cover it regardless of what happens. So listening is important. How can we encourage that and make it joyful? I don't have an answer for that. I think it's more to do with the kind of environment you create in the classroom. So that whatever conversation, whether it's questions, whether they are answers, whether it's about listening, you have created a space where people are having fun with the discussion. So regardless of what is happening or what they're saying, they are in that space where they feel that it's something I'm enjoying doing. When we talk about, the joy of learning, not just the joy of talking. So I think that needs to be in that as well. And it's more so to do with the kind of environment they are in.
Kind of environment, yes.
Yeah, I think listening is really incredibly important, especially in an environment where we see like public debates are getting increasingly polarized in the online space and even offline. And I think, people of my generation, millennials, we would always talk about cancel culture, the fact that you could say something that someone so entirely disagrees with that they do not want to engage with it. And I think for me, as an educator, what I really want to teach is that we shouldn't shut down when someone says something that we disagree with, that instead we should take that time to examine what are the values that this person has or what are the assumptions that they are having about a situation that derives this particular opinion, right? And to hold space for that opinion as valid instead of jumping into conclusion and to engage with it. Because I don't think we should be afraid of disagreement. Like, I think we should create spaces in our classroom for people to disagree and to have very strong opinions and substantiate the opinions, but we should be very wary of a situation where all conversation shuts down. And I think, as for Singapore as a society, if we want debates, a culture of healthy public debate, then we have to be good at listening. And I think it really just starts from the classroom. And underscoring that, I believe, is the value of empathy and understanding and giving dignity to other people and the opinions that they have. And again, I agree with Steve, it is a matter of creating that classroom culture, which is a lot more indelible than a set of rules. It's really how you as a teacher even respond to students when they get things wrong or when you disagree with your students. And that sets the tone for the rest of the discussions.
The culture and environment of respect, isn't it, for ideas, and not just for saying the right thing or saying what others say.
Yeah,
well.
or even, certain students, like, I remember being in secondary school and, some kids would just think that, oh, when I say something because it comes from me, my teacher already has a preconceived notion that this is a bad idea. And I think that's something that we should be very wary of, where, we're really giving weight to the opinions and the things said and not like the particular student that it's coming from. And I say this as someone who was usually the student that the teacher wanted to hear things from. And then I will be very conscious of the fact that somebody already said it, but except that person probably the socks were too low and the belt was too low, but when it comes from me, suddenly, oh yeah, that's a great idea, Amanda. So
I think we know Amanda was the smart kid in class. Right? She was. We know the
motor mouth, Mandy. Sometimes my teachers wanted me to shut up.
We have a question. In fact, we have many people asking this next question. And I'll just read one of the questions from Y-Kit. And Y-Kit asked this question: what are some concrete ways to foster exploratory talk for students given the current barriers to in-person interaction that we face? So, so another question that Eric asked also is in the same vein, with the new normal of wearing a face mask and a shield, how do we then still instill the joy of talk in the classroom?
This is the new way of communicating, isn't it? Yeah. So we have a physical barrier, which is the mask, but it does not stop us from conducting speech. And one thing that we tend to forget is that 90% of communication is nonverbal. It's in our gestures, in our eye contact, in our movement, in our facial expressions. So the mask is just a part that is restricted. You can still hear us. It's very oral and audible, but at the same time, we are expressing and communicating whole body. And this is something that I find I've had to bring attention to for children and younger people to be able to decode these messages, not just because of the mask and COVID and all these barriers, but because there's an entire generation that's brought up looking with their heads down like this at a device. And so they don't observe, there's no modeling. So we've been forced now, because of COVID and additional screen time, to be able to decode this non-verbal storytelling that is going on around us and to supplement it with this masked language that's also going on. So we're kind of tapping in, right, to a very primal ability that all of us are born with, which is this ability to deconstruct everything else that is going on apart from what we can hear and what is verbal. So in a way, it's good, you know, it's forcing us to get into touch with what we truly are as human beings, as communicators.
I would say just carry on with life as per normal. I mean, sure, technology is now, the masks are there, but I mean, we can still meet people. It's not that we can't, you just practice safe distancing. And at the same time, these are all just tools, that the iPad, the phone. I mean, this is actually related to one question from Faye at STC asking about one-to-one computing and more online learning. I mean, it's the same thing. I think these are tools to allow you to communicate. How you choose to use it, how you present yourself on screen. We are talking to you now live in your home. In the same way, I could be anywhere. I could be on a stage in a physical room with you. So I think these are not barriers to entry. These are just different tools, but the way we interact, our body language, our visual gestures, whatever, still remain the same, So I think just we need to embrace the masks and the tools and find a way to work it into whatever we are doing. And then life will carry on as per normal.
Amanda, any thoughts about how it looks like in a courtroom?
I haven't yet appeared on Zoom court, but from my experience teaching kids in Readable, we were online on Zoom, and we took it offline as soon as we could, because I really have a lot of sympathy for that question. Like, I was in that situation as well, where you do feel that there is a barrier, and it is not quite the same, because I suppose as teachers, we can't really sense the energy of the room, even if you get all your kids to turn on your camera. But I think that what I realized is that definitely watching people, I can sense their energy on screen to me, and I can sense their level of engagement. And it's so tempting when we're on Zoom calls or teaching on Zoom to just not put that same level of energy that we would to teaching a real life class. And I do think that there are palpable effects to those who are listening. And so to be more kind of conscious of the energy level, to try and also bring in real life objects into the discussions, right? Very simple activities like, take an object from your house and explain like its significance to you in the past week, or how it is a symbol for how you've been coping through circuit breaker. Like little things like that I find kind of help us to like tether ourselves back to reality and engage in a more personal way even when we're on Zoom. But yeah, I mean, I do definitely, like you, Waikiat, who asked that question, I definitely long for the day where we can all be in the same room again without any health hazards.
Well, everyone is now getting a taste of what is like to work in TV. Because, when there's a camera in front of you, so I'm not always this animated at home when I speak to everyone,
Yes.
I mean, so you have a certain level of energy. And same thing, as Amanda said, when you're teaching, you need to have that extra oomph, and that's why you should feel tired after a session. If you don't, then you haven't been, going and giving that energy, because unfortunately, the camera doesn't reveal it as much as it would if we were face to face.
Yeah.
So you have to put in that extra 110% to have that, that energy come across on screen to the kids at home in their rooms,
Yeah.
And that requires effort.
Yeah, but you're so practiced at it, like I immediately sensed your energy when you're giving the keynote.
But you switch off the camera and I'll be like, oh, okay.
But it energized me as well, listening to that.
him,
So I feel that you can create that kind of like symbiotic energy in your online classrooms as well, as Steve demonstrated.
You should see us during it'd be like, okay, and this is happening, then commercial break, and I'm like, wow, very tired. Yesterday I slept so late, I tell you.
We have a question from Wen Ao, I think. And the question is, I tend to have the selected few who dominate our class conversation in class.
Sorry.
While I try to encourage others to speak, the same pupils tend to hijack the moment with interesting comments. Your thoughts?
You see, this is why I was called Motor Mouth Mandy, right? Because I was that person who always had something to say about something. And I do think that it is a very valuable thing to teach these children, such as myself, to take a step back and listen to what other people have to say, and maybe encourage them, hey, why don't you listen to what these other children have to say, and then give your responses to what they are saying. So you're actually forcing them and targeting them to take a step back and listen, and even give them the task of summarizing the discussion. So then they're really forced to pay attention and synthesize the information that other people are sharing, right? And that is playing to their strengths, and in fact, encouraging them to upskill themselves, right? Rather than just talking about their own opinion, it's their job to be like the TV host and synthesize what was discussed.
And the other thing is the teacher needs to be a moderator to a certain extent. One of the tricks we have in a way is when I have an interviewee who's just going on and on and on, I just wait for him to take a breath. And then I jump in, to cut him off, because it's like nobody cares about what you're talking about anymore, But in a way, if we learn to teach the kids, they don't need to talk forever as well. So teachers need to also have some of those skills to facilitate the conversations. That would be very helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
There are many ways to deal with students like this. One would be, again, depending on their age, right? For the younger, more impatient ones, you know that sometimes it helps to allow them that opportunity to go first. And then you continue with the rest of the class. And like Stephen mentioned, the teacher is a moderator. So having little devices and tools like physical signifiers, like time, so there's a bell or there's a movement, so then you stop and it's next person because this object has moved to the other person. But what I think is good with older students or older participants is always to think of conversation or narratives or any language activity as co-creation, which means that in this group of 5, we're going to create together. Everybody's going to contribute. Everyone is going to speak together. So this has to be co-created. There is no one narrator, and there's no one person who's going to write this down. Everybody's going to do this together. So that automatically divides the roles, the attention, the time, and the amount of talk that takes place in a group.
There are many questions actually from our audience, and I'd like to just pick one last one for us. And this is from Natasha from Queenstown Primary. And she asks, what is one thing about speaking that you wish your teachers had taught you when you were a student in school?
Wow.
That speaking up can make change. Yeah. Change for the world, change for people, change for the community. That speaking up is something that you don't have to be afraid of. And you never need to be called upon to speak up, that we have the right to speak up whenever we want to. So I wish 45 years ago, my teachers had told me that we all had a right to speak up.
Thank you, Hanna.
And to speak freely, not to feel, because it's like when you're called on, like, you got called to answer the question, right? It's almost, it has very negative connotations. Whereas it should be fine. It should be, if it's a conversation, then there is no threat. There isn't any burden to like, Amanda, produce the right answer, say the smart things, So I think, again, I'm harping on this, but it comes back to the environment, It's not so much about teaching them to speak, but allowing them to speak. And I know you said last question, but I'm going to take over your job and do what I... There is one asking about how speech style is often a marker of status, and many kids are reluctant to talk because they don't sound atas or they don't sound posh. They may not speak fluent English. How can we address this? I really think the learning process, even though you are an English teacher, there is no harm in using Singlish every now and then. It's how do you use it in context. And if you think about it, there is one former minister who speaks in Singlish all the time, but he's grammatically correct if you ever listen to him. And he even came up with the word betterer. I love that word because this is betterer than you are. I mean, but the point is that, it connects with the people and you are still getting your message across. So don't be afraid to, I guess, dumb it down, to use language that connects with the crowd. I mean, I often change the way I speak depending on who I'm speaking to. Just like Amanda would have to do so depending on the kids that are in her class. And we adapt and learn from that. And that's part of a real life skill, where we don't need to always be sounding so professional and so posh, but we need to, again, be at a level where they can connect and relate to us, and in an environment where they are not afraid to do so.
I think that relates to another question about teachers catching the inaccuracies and all that, instead of allowing for the ideas to come through and respect for ideas, really.
Enjoy the idea first. Take the idea, talk about it, then say, by the way, this sentence should have been like that. Exactly. Not say, why you say like that? Yeah.
It's a balance, right? We are always there trying to teach them the correct techniques and the correct methods, but at the same time, we are dealing with youth or with children, and we don't want to hurt them and put them off this experience of speaking. And so I think exactly, what Stephen said, we need to make sure that it's a process where there's guidance, but at the same time, we allow them to understand these are things that you need to be aware of. If you're going to say this in future, this is how you string the sentence together. But well done that you shared this idea, that you were brave enough to stand here and talk about this. So modeling is important. I get a lot of people asking me about accent work, about being bilingual or trilingual, and also Singlish coming into how they speak. And to me, the first thing that's important in communication is to be calm. And that's when people feel your energy and listen to the message rather than look at your punctuation, your diction, your accent, your stresses. So if the whole point of you speaking is to send a message to someone, stay calm and be honest to yourself. Everyone has their own style, even as artists, and we don't need to be technically perfect.
Amanda?
I think to respond to both conversations at once, I really do think that personally I've learned a lot from engaging with the kids in my readable class over 7 years about the joy of exploratory talk. So most of the kids, they're actually from low-income backgrounds, and they are in either like normal tech or normal academic streams. But I am just incredibly impressed by their fearlessness in sharing their ideas. And I think they've also challenged me as an educator to never assume that any topic is too sophisticated or out of bounds for our discussion. So one of the things that I really enjoyed doing with them over Circuit Breaker is we would watch plays online, like The Necessary Stage, Those Who Can't Teach, or Emily of Emerald Hill. And then we would do our own like small circle of like artistic critique on what happened on stage and like the significance of different things. And I think the arts should be used this way as a way of opening conversations. And some of the kids, they had such strong opinions about what was happening on stage. Like for Those Who Can't Teach, which is a play about children in the normal stream, they told me that they really feel that kids from elite schools don't understand what it's like to be them, and that they are just living these sheltered lives, but they don't know what it means to have to look after someone at home, like a younger sibling, to do the housework, to even follow your mom to work, to clean. And they were just very vocal about this, and they say, yeah, I think that if you're in an elite school, you would not appreciate the realities of life. And here am I sitting there, having been from an elite school, and then I told them at the end, I was like, actually, teacher Amanda was from an elite school, and they like laughed for an inordinate amount of time, right? But I think it's just creating those spaces for the kids to speak. And most recently, we actually got them to write letters to their member of parliament to talk about things that were important to them in their estate. And again, through that brainstorming process, it was hugely educational for me to understand their perspectives and how it differs from mine, because I'm someone who grew up in a fair amount of privilege. And I wish that when I was in school, there was more of these opportunities for conversations between people who are from different backgrounds. And I don't think we do that enough, and I think it's so valuable because we learn so much from each other, and especially in Singapore, where one of the hot button issues right now is social inequality. We do need to start from the classroom to bring in people who are different from us, whatever perspective it may be. Maybe it's someone with a disability, to hear from their experiences and to engage with that, and to be in that position of listening and learning, even as we explore and talk together.
What a wonderful point there about being inclusive and ensuring that we listen to people who are quite different from us, who have very different views as well.
Yeah, next time we won't invite Amanda to the panel. We'll invite someone else, I think.
One of my kids from Readable, I'm sure they would love to be here. It was really interesting as well because during circuit breaker, I was invited on a podcast and they invited me to bring a kid along with me. And in the end, they asked her a question about what it was like doing home-based learning in the digital divide because she didn't own a laptop before home-based learning started. So she just shared really relatably her anecdote of not having a computer, or she had an old laptop that took 20 minutes to start before we gave her a new one. And she ended up being quoted in Parliament. What she said on that podcast was quoted in Parliament, and it was a huge encouragement for her. And that goes back to what Kamini said, that speaking up can make a difference. It makes people more aware of the hurdles that these children have to go through. And she's only like a 14-year-old girl, and to have that kind of platform was really amazing for her. And I hope that that's what we do in our classrooms throughout Singapore.
Thank you. We promised you exploratory talk, and I think we've got that. I think you go away with tips on what to do in the next lesson that you enact in your classroom. So through this discussion today, we have explored how as teachers of English, we can enable our students to learn to become empathetic communicators, discerning readers, and creative inquirers. Colleagues, I hope this panel discussion has been a feast for your thoughts and a catalyst for many experiences of the joy of talk in your own classrooms and wherever you are. It leaves me now to thank our distinguished panelists, Ms. Amanda Chong, Ms. Kamini Ramachandran, and Mr. Stephen Chia. Thank you for this conversation and this privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you
everyone.
for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.